Ladies and gentlemen, ends up being a bit of a small group here, but I'd like to welcome you most warmly. Today, what we'd like to cover is sustainability. Now, sustainability is no longer just a political paradigm, but we believe this is something that has become part and parcel of industrial production. Everyone's talking about it these days. And here's why. There's the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD for short, which is and this is a European directive that I'd like to touch on here and there, because people might be asking the question, is that just an annoying obligation to fulfill the CSRD requirement, or is it the foundation for sustainable production? I'm Stephan Stieren. I'm a researcher at Fraunhofer-Institut for Mechatronic Systems Design in Paderborn, not far from here at all. For those of you who don't know the city, it's really beautiful. And what we're doing is we are investigating sustainability requirements and how that can be integrated into the development of mechatronic and cyber-physical systems design. I'm not a financial expert, so there are other experts that could focus on that. I'll be happy to forward the question if you have any. I'm an expert in product development, and this is what I'm going to cover today here, and software development, etc. And that might be something we would like to talk about. So let's get started then. You see the EU flag and CSRD. Is it an annoying obligation, or is it the foundation for sustainable production? I said before, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive is a directive by the European Union which stipulates reporting obligations for the majority of companies in Europe that have a capital market orientation. Now, what that means, well, I'll tell you in a moment. And it covers a number of reporting or disclosure obligations by those companies along the lines of sustainability KPIs, like the carbon footprint, for instance. I'm going to explain to you first what this is about, how that can be segmented into scope 3 reporting, and this is something that we addressed in earlier discussions. I'm also going to talk about the impact that the CSRD has for many companies, essentially for all manufacturing businesses. We're here at EMO, which precisely looks at manufacturing businesses. This is what I put my focus on. Then I will offer a solution when it comes to product and process accounting. So sustainability accounting of products, production and production processes. And I'll tell you what we do at the Fraunhofer-Institut for Mechatronic Systems Design and how we do this. And I will always talk about sustainable production throughout my talk, just to give you an impression of what it looks like on the shop floor, or what it could look like on the shop floor. And then when I finish, I'm going to circle back to the earlier question of whether, for you, this is an annoying obligation or truly becomes a foundation for sustainable production. We have plenty of time for Q&A, I've been told. So it's an omnibus question. Obviously, I could go on and talk forever about it. We'll try to make do with the time we have. So there we are. You see this building, which stands for a piece of legislation published by the European Union. Who's affected by that legislation? Generally, it refers to all companies that have a capital market orientation. It's independent of the size of the company. I mean, there is a staggered applicability of the law for companies, but it's fair to say the criterion is to have, has been to have more than 500 employees. This is no longer going to be the case. The non-financial reporting directive is about 10 years old. It will be replaced by the new one, by the CSRD, but the non-financial reporting directive was referring only to larger companies, larger than 500 employees, that is. And it's going to be relevant for bigger companies larger than 250 employees. Now, must have a balance sheet total of 20 million euros and sales revenues of 40 million euros, and a capital market orientation is not required any longer. And here's where it gets interesting. I've been talking about the capital market here for a while. Well, this time round, we're here in Hanover at a trade fair where companies need to report that are not working on the capital market and that originally were not obliged to report. However, by the CSRD, they will be affected for two reasons. I'm going to give you tell you a story here. Just a couple of weeks ago, I traveled to a banking event, and the banks were talking about this. And the banks and financial institutions are already preparing now to structure their loans based on CSRD requirements. So they're going to they're developing some mechanisms in how to structure their bank loans in the future. So those who have better CSRD values will get a better bank loan than the ones that don't. At the end of the day, it would lead to a market advantage. So banks agree, and we also agree in the research environment, that there are products that can be produced in a more sustainable fashion. I'll give you an example in a minute. So we are truly facing disruption in product development for machine tool makers. Imagine, I mean, obviously, all of you are using a smartphone. You know how these are produced? Well, they have a number of obligations to meet recyclability, etc. And the same is here in our industry. It will lead to upheaval and changes. It's going to be relevant for every manufacturing business, because they need to deliver at the end of the day. What are these numbers against which you have to deliver? Now, this is the architecture of the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, ESRS for short. The CSRD refers to those standards, and it's saying that these standards have to be implemented by reporting or by the reports sent by companies. It's a repetitive process. There are occasional publications here and there and amendments to those publications. What you see here is 3 months old. And last month, another amendment has been made, but I think this picture is relatively up to date. And mind you, these are not only environmental or climate standards, it's also about social issues, governance, interdisciplinary standards, etc. All of these are involved here. There's a total of 85 disclosure obligations. Now, 27 of them are obligatory. Read something about 18, but I think 27 is what I read. That must be reported, in other words. And then there will be materiality assessments by companies, so which companies need to report, which ones don't. But this essentially is the gist of the matter. These are the standards that you need to report. When will it come into force? Well, it has been adopted already, I must say. This year, the CSRD was adopted and still needs to be transposed into national legislation. But normally in the EU, once Europe takes a decision, it takes a time. There's a transition period before it gets transposed into national legislation. However, it becomes active for companies that already have reported by the non-financial reporting directive as early as next year, 2024. Now, obviously, that's not many, those who had reported so far, because there's also a graded system. Now, beginning 2025, it will be large corporation and group of companies, always referring to the financial year, right? Financial or fiscal year of 2025. They will have to report in by 2026, but 2026 will also include small and medium-sized enterprises that are not capital market oriented, so those also need to report their figures. Interestingly enough, it's going to be relevant for non-EU companies, so large corporations that have a subsidiary in the European Union will also need to report beginning fiscal 2028. Well, there's one condition. They have to have a balance sheet total of more than 140 million euros in the EU, but still, it's going to be relevant for them. Even if they're not European corporations, they will have to submit their reports. Now, who's in charge of that? that at the end of the day? Now, I'm not an auditor, so I think I can skip that rather quickly. For management positions or the supervisory board, there will be new management functions that have to be appointed for this. And also an external review will have to be in place and a monitoring of the reporting process. This is currently being rolled out. Now, how do these audits take place? There will be external audits. There are mandatory external audits of contents by an accountant or an external auditor or independent auditing organizations that can provide unqualified audit statements. If you have more questions, feel free to ask me, but I can forward that to my colleagues because we do research and prototype development. But be it as it may, what is the whole legislation based on? The Sustainability Reporting Directive. Well, there is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is the foundation for this report, and the GHG Protocol is applied to the organizational level of a company. So, an example, our institute has done a sustainability assessment of what we do, and it only refers to our organization. There are three scopes. Scope 1 refers to emissions from your own activities. Now, imagine you have a vehicle fleet, of your company cars, in other words. That company car fleet has a certain level of emissions, like your fuel emissions related to fuel consumption. Scope 2 are emissions from energy generation. Electricity, heat, steam, everything you use in your organization has to be calculated. And that can be done reasonably easily. So the figures are there, you can read it, you can capture it. Why? Because the big one is the most complex one. Scope 3 are all other emissions, all of them. So these refer to indirect emissions from other sources. Scope 3 takes an overall stance to analyze the LCI, the life cycle inventory. Now, what we did in our institute, we have an office building with copying machines and copying paper. The paper that sits in our offices has a carbon footprint. That carbon footprint also has to be reported, has to be part of your accounting. It needs to be part of your overall carbon footprint. Now, what's interesting, in Scope 3, you also need to account for your products that you are producing and then used on the customer side, and all the processes that you use within your company to produce a certain product. Now, just behind me, I've been told there's a milling machine. That's the one that's so noisy. Now, that milling machine would also have to be factored in your carbon footprint calculation. Now, how do you do that? How do you calculate for a machine that has 1,000 parts in it? All of them come from different suppliers, different supply chains, and so on. The CSRD wants you to report all Scope 3 emissions. Now, what do we do in our research and when we talk to our clients to deal with it? Imagine the overall carbon footprint calculation is something that is upstream, everything that goes into the company, everything that's downstream, leaves the company or the organization, anything that is more or less related to sustainability for society and for the product as far as it affects your company. And that's a huge amount of data, many indicators, KPIs, a lot of money, and at the end of the day, it's about innovation, and finally, also, I should say that, it's about surviving in the market. For the entire system to work, you need to be able to survive in reporting. Now, we have come up with one proposed solution. The digital twin is coming back. This time it's green, the digital green twin. Why? It's not just greenwashing we're doing, mind you. All we did was to try and come up with answers to how you can use existing methodologies and approaches and turn that into something that takes companies forward. Now, we are in that chapter are coming from theory down to practical hands-on. And I'm doing that for a reason, because we work a lot in research at Fraunhofer-Institut. So let us use the V model of the green digital canvas. We made a publication a couple of years ago, before the COVID pandemic, I think it was 2018 or 2019, where that notion was relevant. We started our work at the time and looked at the product development process using the V model. Now, how could you support that with a digital tool to connect all the sustainability indicators? It's a bit of a global problem. It ranges from requirements definition at the top, all the way to product disposal or the end of life and recycling. So throughout that product development process, you create a carbon footprint, and that's normal. You are creating a footprint, otherwise you cannot produce a material or physical item. And the green digital twin is the digital image of your product or service, or of a process for that matter. It includes and connects virtual models and data that draws onto different environmental and sustainable factors of a product life cycle. The objective of the green digital twin is to make sustainability potentials transparent and optimize recycling and utilization processes. Now, that's a mouthful. What does that mean for us at our institute when we talk about the digital twin? Now, imagine you have a technical asset. Could be a robot that does some pick-and-place applications. And in the second step, you have your R&D department. The R&D department creates models. Even in a small company, use CAD models. Could be comprehensive data models in big ERP or PLM systems. Be it as it may, digital models exist in most organizations, I would say. Sometimes on a very interactive level. Model-based systems engineering, for instance, is very intricate. But you also have the production and the operation, where I'm standing in front of that image right here on the left. And this is where data is captured. Also, at times, very good energy data captured that you need for the calculation and carbon footprint calculation. We call that the digital shadow. Now, if you merge those two, the digital model and the digital shadow, you get the digital twin. Sounds very theoretical, and the way how to put it into practice is a different kettle of fish, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. So we wanted to get from the technical asset to the digital twin first. How do you turn it green? Well, you have emissions data from production showing on the top left in your digital shadow. And on the right, for your life cycle assessment, you can do an LCA model. Well, you don't, the production company, but you can use your processes and products and have them evaluated by someone else. So the technology comes from the 1990s. It's there, fairly sophisticated. So there's a way to model your life cycle assessment, and there's software available to do that as well. This life cycle assessment is a way to get a handle on all of your data. Now, here's how this works and how you could do that, and what software, on the software level, to do that, to make sure that the individual products for which that you need to capture can actually be captured using a carbon footprint approach. Here we are. This is the life cycle assessment. That's a definition of a life cycle assessment. It's a compilation and assessment of the input, output, and potential environmental impact of a product system throughout its entire life cycle. This methodology comes from the 1990s. Well, you can do a paper-based process, of course, and there's a standard out there to do that. We are not doing that in a paper-based process. We have a software-based process. We also assess different potential global warming potential, acidification potential, water consumption, resource consumption, etc. And it rests on two specific standards you see there. So that standard exists out there, and you can use different frameworks to conduct your own life cycle assessment, but these are the most important ones, the two ones you see on the right. So what I'm saying is there is an international standard system. So what does that look like? How could you model your KPIs? We come from model-based development in our group, I should say, in our department. So what we do is we assume anything that's calculated or modeled can be based on an existing software. So this is how you could do it. Lifecycle assessment is the first thing you do. You define your objective and your investigation scope, what you want to investigate, what's the system for which you want to analyze the process. Now, the CNC system or the milling machine behind me, that would be a process, right? And there are different targets and limitations and functional units for your assessment. For instance, we have CO2 per kilo of shipped goods or CO2 per cubic meter of soil, liters, front headlight of a vehicle, what have you. And then you want to understand what is your scope of investigation. And then you do a life cycle inventory analysis. It looks like a flowchart. You'll see it in one of the next pictures. You identify systems limitations, which you normally do when you model mechatronic systems, and then you capture data, allocate them, calculate them, and if you have a good data quality, at the end of the day, you end up with a good, robust model and a good carbon footprint, or well, let's say a realistic carbon footprint. Where do they come from? The data? I mean, that's the main problem. If you want to have a software-based process, you need to get data from somewhere. There are three ways to do that. One is primary data. It's been our experience when we work with companies in larger production lines that the primary data are often not sufficient. The primary data is not captured in the first place. So, fact of life. And there's nothing you can do about that. The system's too global. But then there's also secondary data. There are databases you can use to capture your secondary data. ECO-Invent is one, a big database, or Gabi is one. And different documentation capabilities that are already out there. And then finally, is environmental product declarations, EPD. There are existing declarations for different use cases that have been developed in different institutions across the EU, and that can be used, for which you can access in order to do your carbon footprint calculations, or you can use estimated data. Sometimes you need to estimate because you don't have reliable databases, or these are incomplete. They may include false or questionable numbers for different processes. And here comes the question, who's going to estimate your process of your milling machine that sits behind me? Or well, who's going to do it? Who captures the data? Who accounts for them? Is that someone doing that with my own interest in mind or their own interests in mind, which could be detrimental for me in the final analysis? And that's not trivial, because it's about real money at the end of the day. So, in the final analysis, there's a life cycle assessment or impact assessment, where you classify and assess different footprint scenarios, and also allows you to understand how can you change your product and process in such a way that it becomes energy efficient or with a low carbon footprint. The different categories, resource consumption, global warming potential, ozone depletion potential, acidification potential are just some of those. So, I said, it's a lot of theory, and now let's move over to the practical part, and I'll tell you how you can turn these data into a digital product. There are solutions and technologies out there that can do that, and that can also connect you to existing databases. ECO-Invent, for instance, is a database you see here, or Gabi as a database, which we don't have in the picture here, I understand, but different software products. What we are currently using is a freeware called OpenLCA. Now, what's the advantage of OpenLCA? Many companies are facing a problem that when they're reporting, they need to pay license fees. OpenLCA is freeware. So it comes with no fee, and it's much better than not having anything at all. OpenLCA allows you to do something that was going to be a challenge in the years to come, to connect your data to an ERP program like SAP. Now, SAP is saying, yes, we can do that, but it doesn't really work that well. They still have to develop a conduit for that, and our research responsibility is to develop something. So methods and technologies that exist should also become compatible with existing software landscapes, legacy landscapes in companies. And that can be done. So carbon footprinting works. All you need to do is to get started with it and understand what you need, what input data you need for your process. It takes me to another topic here that I am showing you, which was EPD, or Environmental Product Declarations. I believe it's the foundation for sustainable production. Why is that? Just to give you an example, during Easter, I went on a cruise with my wife, cruise ship journey by a German shipbuilder, and had a Blue Angel icon at the stern of the ship. And I was wondering, following concrete, cruise ship tourism is the second worst environmental disaster. And why do they have the Blue Angel carbon footprint symbol? Well, and they told me that ship runs on LNG, liquefied natural gas, and not diesel fuel or heavy oil, which some do. So then I thought, well, that's interesting. You still have the same energy consumption, although your fuel is eco-friendly. The Blue Angel icon is an environmental product declaration level 1. Different requirements, lower requirements in level 1. So you can say, okay, I use my Blue Angel cruise ship, but there are also product requirements, or EPDs, environmental product declarations, on level 3, which is based on life cycle assessment of products and product systems. Now, how could that work? Now, let me say again, and it's also what you see here on the slide, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. What does that mean? It means there are things that you don't understand by measure your own products or systems. So you have to embark on a different journey. Now, it starts with product category rules in ISO 14025. These are specific rules and requirements for the establishment of for the preparation of an EPD, of an environmental product declaration. Why do you need product category rules? Well, because the standard tells you so. You have to do an LCA, a life cycle assessment for your process. And then once you're done, you end up with an environmental product declaration that has been or can be determined by different institutions based on a life cycle assessment with defined requirements for a given industry. Why am I telling you this? Because this is industry specific. There are EPDs, but those are not complete. Some industries don't exist at all in terms of an EPD, and some industries are actually fighting against those because they haven't quite understood they need it. The construction industry is very advanced in that. They've already done that, because the construction industry over the past years has been cleaning up its act and has done an awful lot. I mean, when you build your own home, you get public subsidy if you do a carbon footprint, and that's what my banking advisor told me. But in other industries, machine tools, production systems, they don't have those EPDs yet. And this is where the problem is. EPDs are the only scientific reporting instrument to communicate environmental data meaningfully. No other instruments exist, and this is what's going to happen. All new instruments in the future will have to use EPDs. Nothing else works as things stand now. If the industry is not writing their EPDs, someone else will do that. They will assess the carbon footprint of your product or process. What does that mean? Now, I show that in a large type font here. It's happening by the instruments and interests that this stakeholder group prefers. Now, that's dangerous for entire industries. I'm not going to compare that to other industries that have had a harder time here in Germany. But if those industries don't stick with those rules, they will be suffering competitive disadvantages, significant ones in the years to come. We have to capture in figures and we have to report. There's no way around it. We must do it, full stop. And this is why the EU came up with the CSRD. They started through the financial markets, right? So it's not just a report that you're writing and it's deposited and shelved somewhere. No, it's used to adapt your products. Product development will be changed based on CSRD. I talked about EPDs before. This is what it may look like. This comes from the construction industry and products, designs and phases that can be involved. And it also spells out what type of carbon accounting you do. Just use it, because the construction industry has been doing it for a while now. And here comes my last theory slide before we continue with practice examples. If you do your reporting and it works really well, and as a modeling expert, I become alert when you say that, you can optimize your processes in a sustainable type of way. Different potentials you see here, and the color coding here refers to the modeling of a product and its impact onto individual effect categories. They come in different sizes. Bars are longer or shorter, and you can play around with it. So, for instance, just recently, I had a good partner that we worked with in one of our research projects, and they did exactly that. And then they realized, for whatever reason, we don't need such a large power pack in our machining center. So they used a bigger power pack for that machine not to boot 4 minutes, but only 1 minute. And then we said, maybe we adjust just one category and get a better result in the carbon footprint calculation. So for the entire life cycle assessment, there will be changes here and there as a matter of ongoing innovation. So that was a lot of talk, I admit. So let's talk about examples from here, applications and results. And I'm going to tell you more about this.
Wir haben aktuell ein Forschungsprojekt, das nennt sich Nalysys, wo wir so einen grünen digitalen Zwilling einmal aufbauen.
Nalysys is one of our research projects where we're currently developing a digital green twin.
Gefördert wird das vom BMBF.
You see the partners that are involved in that project, many car makers in there, supported by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. Forvia, Hella, well, formerly Hella, in Lippstadt is involved, BMW, Covestro, Geber, they do recycling solutions, different universities as well. And Miele, as a domestic appliance manufacturer, is there as well, because they want to apply the findings to domestic appliances, because they will have to do it at some point. And then the University of Paderborn and the Fraunhofer-Institut, the IEM, are there as well. Now, what can you see in this slide? You see in this slide that the automotive industry has not had anything yet. There's a lot of innovation out there in the past that originally came from the car industry, not here, not in this case. So the car industry is currently facing a major problem. This OEM, BMW, approaches its suppliers because they want numbers, and then they ask us, how can we do that? So this is exactly how the project came into existence. So this is how we want to start. Okay, so we had a lot of discussions of how to involve that in the project business. So what would be the most sustainable headlight? And I didn't mention that this is about the LED headlight design of Forvia, so in a car headlight. What is the most sustainable headlight ever built? So that was our research question. To remember the VW Beetle. The Beetle used to have two headlights at the front. Now, imagine you take the light bulb out and put an LED. So imagine that's a new headlight. So think headlight. It was just a clamping ring and a lens through which the light was dissipated onto the road. All of that made in Germany, etc. and so on. And with that headlight, you can actually disassemble it, tear it down completely. I don't know if that was true. I didn't do a life cycle assessment of the old headlight, but it meets all the requirements for your product. It needs to be recyclable and dismountable. So we took the existing headlight module by Hella and tried to tear it down. So anywhere between 200 or 300 parts go into a model headlight, all of that plastic material bonded together. And I think it took us 45 minutes until we decided we just take a hammer and just smash the whole thing. So what car makers do is they don't want to do that, smash it with a hammer, but irrespective of the CSRD, they have to meet other requirements for those systems to be recyclable and dismountable. Imagine what it would look like if you just use bolts, rivets, and clamps for it to be torn down. It would leak. Design-wise, it would look quite differently. So there we are. End of story. What would a life cycle assessment look like? Well, there we are. It looks like a structural decision tree here that you can build up like this. And what you see there in purple or red, reddish purple boxes are production processes shown in the system. It's OpenLCA used as a software. In the background, you'll find the EcoInvent database and many other primary data. So you see a life cycle process of a headlight assembly. Now, this comes from a project, so I cannot disclose further details here. What I could say, as an example, this comes from an injection molding system from the front lens, okay? But I should also say, when you model such a process, and when you're saying the carbon footprint of an injection molded headlight lens also includes suppliers, an entire supply chain, but it must come in one value. So there's a certain level of abstraction you create in reporting. But those who account for the injection molding machine also do that based on some other data that need to be stored in some database. So what they didn't just buy their own injection molding machine and did their calculations. No, they did an estimation. And that's the problem. You get estimated data that may not be corresponding to reality. So we need to focus on that. There's another chart that's interesting. That's the evaluation of it all. What you see there in red, those red bold lines, means the bolder the lines are, the bigger your impact on carbon footprint. I'm not going to say what process this one is. So you see quite clearly which processes contribute to the carbon footprint more than others. And it could also mean that the smaller things like this one here, it still has a carbon footprint, but you see the line is very thin. So you may want to optimize this process because that line is bolder. Different recycling, different materials, etc. In other words, in product development, we need to optimize the relative boxes that are more crucial when it comes to carbon footprint, and we shouldn't stop there. Now, I'm wrapping up, and I think I've been talking plenty now about this. What are the important takeaways going forward? And once I've done that, I am ending there. So this is only the beginning. CSRD is not the end of the story. So there'll be more regulation. More regulation also in terms of density and speed will be increasing. We also see that in the automotive industry there will be future requirements on decomposition and teardown of end-of-life vehicles. It'll happen in other industries as well. It's not going to be the beginning. It's just the foundation where people need to get ready for. In order to brace up to that challenge, we suggest companies to check your own data availability. Do you have data available? Emissions-related data that can be molded into a digital green twin. Do you have processes? Do you have infrastructures? You can get ready now. So get ready for automated sustainability reporting. We have another partner to do that from the electronics industry. And they do 14,000 to 16,000 products. Now, all derivatives, but, individual 16,000 product items. A couple of years ago, they said, well, let's do an LCA of those products. What do we need? They want to understand all of that, how all of this can be optimized, the process, to automate it, to integrate that into their existing data repositories. And quite a few companies have been doing an excellent job already, I should say that. So the upshot is, if you stop there, well, you will have to partner with external sources, and you necessarily don't want that, as I said before. You need to identify relevant KPIs. You can do that in small projects with some partners. We're one of them, and I'll tell you what we do about that and to understand the status quo. So I'm currently have that task on my plate. Does it have an impact on my business? Yes or no? And how do I go about it? And then finally, you want to integrate and develop your sustainability reporting forward. It's going to be a reality for every company, even smaller ones. I was a bit astounded that SMEs will be affected by the CSRD, but it will be a reality. Something that's not in slide here. Talk to your auditor. Right? Auditors know that. They know something will be happening. And they know that they will have to audit your company. And they know what can be done, what remedial action can be taken, and they can also support you. Well, what do we do? And this is really my final slide that I'm showing you today. We wanted to offer a new research area, something you don't find on our webpage. This is the first time I'm showing this. We're calling it Sustainable Systems Development. And I'll be chairing that division in my institute. We're going to support companies in that in two areas. One, sustainability assessment. So that's something you can do today. So you need to wrap your head around it and then see what you have. LCA, then product assessment for the potential on circular economy. I haven't talked about that yet, the circular economy. And then energy transparency. We have that on board as well. Energy flows, material flow in the company is part of that. And then in the second step, once you know what it is, you can optimize it and combine it with other LCAs based on your data sets with model-based development that can be compounded as well. We do that already. Quite a few approaches, no solutions yet, though. So fundamentally, it can be done. We need to develop that forward. We're currently developing tools for that support function. And finally, also what's included here as well is energy management and load management. And my final anecdote that I wanted to share with you, because I was not only at EMO but also at the eWorld show in Essen. And the eWorld is the leading exhibition for the energy industry, which also focused on energy management. So how can you prepare companies for better energy management in the future? And I talked to one person from a company and had a bit of an argument. And I said, well, can't we do more flexibility and load management in production equipment and production management? And the guy said, you can only do that by shutting down or reducing the output of your production system. And it turns out it's not true, not for every process. No. Fraunhofer has a big project that has been looking into this. So even if your processes are optimized for lean management, you can still tap energy efficiency pools. Depends on your industry, depends on your processes, of course, but this is something we offer as a service as well. Okay, this has taken me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening in this small group here. I'll be happy to talk to you even more. The question is, we can go back full circle to my earlier question. Is it an annoying obligation, or is it the foundation for sustainable production? Thank you very much. It was nice talking to you, and I'll be looking forward to your questions and a little discussion if you feel so inclined.